16 years ago, I married my wife. And my wife and I, we stood under a hoopah. Maybe you've seen a hoopah. It's 4 poles and a sheet that's draped over these poles. Many people today, they get married under hoopahs. And we stood under this hoopah and we said our vows to each other and we kissed. And we became man and wife. The ironic thing is, 16 years ago, I had no idea what it meant to stand under the hoopah. And the hoopah, it is a rich and deep Jewish wedding tradition that comes out of the story of Moses and Exodus. And it's the story of God rescuing these slaves. And as he rescues them, he calls them into a marriage. He calls them into a relationship. And at the end of the story of Exodus, God hovers over them, his presence hovering over them, delighting in them, blessing them, and leading them in this new adventure and this new marriage. And so a Jewish groom and a Jewish bride, they stand under a hoopah on their wedding day. And the imagery is that God is there blessing these vows. And then they take the hoopah and they place it over a bed. And this couple, they make love under the hoopah for the very first time. And then their friends, they carry this hoopah over the Jewish groom and his bride for 7 days as they celebrate this union. They celebrate this new marriage and this adventure. And the imagery is that God is in the vows, that God is in the sex, that God is in the party. And this is the reality that God created sex and God always meant to be there. That it was never God's intention to bring shame to sex. That in Genesis, God created Adam and Eve in his image. And the very first thing he does is he blesses them with his presence. And he blesses them as a married couple to enjoy naked and without shame sex in the garden. That God is not anti-sex. God is not some cosmic killjoy. But God created this as a gift to be enjoyed in marriage. And yet what's happened in our generation is we have ripped sex out of marriage and we've ripped marriage out from underneath the hoopah. And I believe that one of the things God's doing in our day is he's inviting a generation back into his design and his delight for sexuality. He's inviting a generation back under the hoopah that God once again could bless sexuality. A generation not swimming in the brokenness. A generation not stumbling around under the sheets. But men of God and women of God that understand this is a gift from God. And they're not ashamed of sex. That sex isn't something that was invented in some alley somewhere. But sex began in heaven. This was God's idea. It was God's intention. And a generation that recognized the gift of God given in sex and not ashamed of it, but that we would protect it, that we would honor it. And I've wondered through the years why it's so hard for us to talk about sex in the 2 places that it's needed the most, in the home and in the church. And if we begin talking about it and we begin understanding it, and as we begin really getting God's heart for sexuality, I believe so much freedom will come and so much healing will come just by getting a new vision for what God has given in sexuality. So men of God, I just challenge you to dive into the scripture. I challenge you to cultivate a deeper and richer understanding of sexuality. And I challenge you to come and bring your life back under the hoopah where God is blessing and God is protecting and God is leading us into his design for sexuality.